of the dominant military in the region. We are able to call the shots on this, not on the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. We could do it if we so wanted to. It would take more blood and more treasure. But there is, yes, the ceasefire is fragile. It's a concept of a ceasefire. But the number one point is, okay, you got 10 points, you got 15 points. The gaslighting is the fact that the U.S. is losing, that we're somehow defeated.
We are losing. You can't say this is a complete victory.
We've spent $50 billion
with thousands of billions. The counter.
Lee McGowan forcefully challenges Peter Meyer on Newsnight with Abby Phillip as pressure builds around the collapsing ceasefire, the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz, and rising worries about leadership and strategy. And while Peter Meyer attempts to justify the situation, Lee McGowan pushes back hard, exposing the confusion, the missing direction, and the real-life consequences of a plan that is clearly falling apart. As the conversation also expands to global risks like oil supply disruptions, economic strain, and the dangers of unclear messaging during such a critical conflict. So let's take a closer look at how Lee McGowan completely shuts down Peter Meyer on Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
President Trump is really struggling right now, trying pretty aggressively to shape the narrative. He appears to be talking to Iran through Truth Social. Not sure why that conversation can't happen in private. And then he is knocking down his one-time allies and trying to pretend as if he didn't talk to Tucker Carlson maybe about 6 weeks ago, if the New York Times is to be believed.
Well, listen, I think that montage was extremely fair. The president and the people around him have a tendency to, not apply a lot of discretion to the president's allies, regardless of who they are, what they say. And in this case, it has come back to bite them. That said, I don't know who their constituencies are. We know who the president's constituencies are. When it comes to this war, 80-90% of Republican voters, to say nothing of MAGA voters, self-described MAGA voters, support the war, whereas they do not. Who are they siding with? They're siding with the president. I think this ceasefire actually had some legitimacy to it. There was a value to seeing, well, Iran's position had softened. They were coming closer to us. Our position did not. We were conducting restrikes on targets we had already hit. It was time to get a breather and see if the diplomatic process could work. It hasn't worked. Over the course of the last 48 hours, this has become a unilateral ceasefire. If the president allows that to stand, it is a huge embarrassment for him, for the nation, and a sacrifice of American hegemony. That'll frustrate the podcasters. I don't think he cares.
But, I mean, you seem to be kind of actually making a bit of their point, which is that where we are right now is not great. I mean, we have a ceasefire that only one party is adhering to, which is us, the United States. Meanwhile, the Strait of Hormuz is closed. Meanwhile, Israel is continuing strikes in Lebanon. Meanwhile, Arab allies are also experiencing strikes. So where does that really leave us in terms of real progress? And by the way, we have no idea what the points are, okay? They're 10 points. Maybe they exist, maybe they don't. We don't know what they are, but they do seem pretty far apart in terms of what the United States wants and what Iran is willing to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it doesn't take an expert in contract law to know that both sides of an agreement need to have the same understanding of what the agreement is. And it doesn't seem like that's the case here, nor does the public. And so we're in this really interesting position where the win is some agreement with Iran that gives them way more leverage than they had at the beginning in terms of controlling the Strait. And I think what the administration is learning now is that firepower doesn't always win when you're fighting a war that is based and turns on geography of a region and diplomacy and things that get solved without bombs, but actually with nuance and agreements and international relations. He's gutted a State Department that could help him with that. And I think he's just sort of disabled himself from being able to deal with it properly.
What is, do either of you think that there is a constituency or an explanation for why the Megyn Kellys and the Tucker Carlsons are willing to, if Noah is correct, sacrifice a portion of their audience with a message that maybe they don't want to hear?
What really becomes clear here is how fast a situation can weaken when leaders start leaning more on public messaging instead of careful and organized diplomacy, because serious talks, especially in times of conflict, have traditionally been handled in private for a reason. And once those discussions move into the public space, they often make negotiations harder and send signals of uncertainty to both partners and rivals. And we have seen this before in past conflicts where unclear and changing messages created confusion about true intentions, making it much more difficult to reach stable and lasting agreements. And this approach does not only shape perception but can directly affect results when both sides are not fully on the same page. While another major point is how uneven ceasefires usually play out in real situations, since a ceasefire only holds when both sides clearly agree on the terms and actually follow them. But if one side continues its actions while the other pulls back, it creates an imbalance that can quickly shift control. And when this is combined with disruptions around the Strait of Hormuz, it turns into a much bigger issue than just a regional concern, because this narrow route carries a large share of the world's oil supply, so any instability there can spread across energy markets, raise prices, and put immediate pressure on economies around the world. And beyond that, there is a broader strategic layer that goes beyond military strength alone, since modern conflicts are shaped just as much by geography, alliances, and diplomacy as they are by force, meaning countries that control key positions or guide negotiations can gain an advantage even without dominating militarily, which is why strong coordination with allies and clear diplomatic channels are so important, because without them, even powerful military actions may fall short, leaving uncertainty to grow and making long-term stability harder to achieve.
I mean, maybe they took the president at his word when he campaigned against doing, wars in the Middle East. I mean, his entire criticism of George Bush was a failed war in the Middle East and how it was a waste of American prestige and how it was essentially, we sacrificed our soldiers for nothing and we ended up losing American dignity and respect in the global order. That was, it's not what I said. It's what Donald Trump said to gain power in the Republican Party. And, I am not a fan of any of the people who are criticizing him, but I think maybe what united Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly and Alex Jones, people I vehemently disagree with, is that they actually took the president at his word. And they're just another group of people who've been suckered by this guy who lied to them to their face.
I don't think they've been suckered. I mean,
No.
my thing is that, like, Megan's saying, I'm sick of this. Why can't he just act like a normal human? And I'm like, he can't act like a normal human. That's why so many of us worked against him being elected, because we knew that he would have an itchy trigger finger if you gave him a big red button to push. We knew that he was erratic. We knew that he would be not right for this role, which is why so many of us worked to not have him elected. So these people either didn't realize that he was crazy and dangerous, which most of us did, or they didn't care. And now all of a sudden they're like, oh, hold on, if he actually nukes 90 million people, there's going to be blowback on us, and this is crazy, and he can't do it. But we've been saying this for forever.
I know, but I think everybody who took him at his word made a mistake. I agree. I thought he would do terrible things like this. But I'm just saying, when you're asking, why would they possibly, take him on because it could hurt them? It's like let's imagine that they actually think he was like not lying to his face through everybody.
I can't get into their heads, but I do want to play this Tucker Carlson bite from December 2024, because it's about who he thinks Trump is. And I'm sure plenty of people at this table might disagree with his read on it.
I would say Trump voters, like Trump himself, are really forgiving people. They don't seek revenge. They seek some measure of justice because the human heart longs for justice, but they don't seek to grind their enemies under their feet. That's what the left does.
A fair amount of projection maybe in there. Tucker Carlson has done this game for years now, right? I mean, not only is this, I think, the fourth or fifth time he's proclaimed World War III was about to break out, but he tries to maintain this dialogue with the president, thinking he can have influence. And I actually think it's pretty admirable that the president is like, I have pretty hardcore beliefs on this. You talk about Iran. Donald Trump's been saying the same thing since the early 1980s. Like, he is a broken record when it comes to the threat that Iran posed. And I guess I'm just the panel's Pangloss here, because I think that things will work out fine. I trust the plan.
It's possible we could get out of this, but it's hard to see from here, because this ceasefire that we have is actually, we see that they have continual control. He's yelling.
What stands out immediately is the clear gap between what was promised in politics and what is actually playing out on the ground. Because when leaders campaign on avoiding long conflicts, but then move toward escalation, it creates a serious trust issue that goes beyond simple politics. And history has shown that these kinds of shifts often lead to a drop in public confidence and leave allies confused since they depend on steady and predictable positions. And in high-pressure moments like this, mixed messaging does not stay limited to headlines, but directly shapes how other countries react, negotiate, and position themselves going forward. While another important factor is how uncertainty at the top can shake global stability, since when decisions look rushed or inconsistent, markets respond quickly, especially in areas tied to energy supply chains. And even short-term tension around routes like the Strait of Hormuz can drive oil prices higher and raise shipping insurance costs almost instantly, which does not stay limited to one region, but feeds into inflation, transport costs, and daily expenses for people. So when there is no clear strategy, the economic pressure builds up fast. And when you look at the bigger picture, it becomes clear that modern conflicts are not decided by military strength alone, because geography, diplomacy, and alliances matter just as much. And if one side controls key locations or holds regional influence, it can balance out traditional military advantages, which means without a clear end goal, the situation can fall into a repeating pattern of tension and temporary pauses. And that is why a consistent plan is so important, because it is not just about showing strength, but about knowing how to bring real and lasting stability in the end.
He's upset about it, that we are not bombing and they still have control.
They didn't gain that power. They've had that power. We're just seeing them willing to exercise it. And at any point,
They
and
were
this is the
never
point,
willing to exercise it
They
before
did.
the
They
war.
did. In 1987 and 1988, they shut down the Strait, and we opened it up by force.
So when I was in seventh grade,
This is a
In
great,
and then we pushed them
this
into
is a
doing it
great
now.
decision. Right now, what is happening?
Right
What
now,
is happening?
we have the dominant military in the region. We are able to call the shots on this, not on the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. We could do it if we so wanted to. It would take more blood and more treasure. But there is, yes, the ceasefire is fragile. It's a concept of a ceasefire. But the number one point is, okay, you got 10 points, you got 15 points. The gaslighting is the fact that the U.S. is losing, that we're somehow defeated.
We
in all
are
this.
losing. You can't say this is a complete victory.
We have
We've spent
strategic
$50
objectives
billion
of ending
to
nuclear
kill
Iranian
thousands of
military.
civilians.
The counterpoint to what you're saying from the Wall Street Journal op-ed is that declaring victory is premature. They say Trump has achieved some of his war aims, but the Iranian regime remains a threat in the Strait of Hormuz, and the job is far from finished, despite what he promised last week. The unfortunate truth is that Trump put himself in this position. His inconsistent rhetoric on the war, claims of victory amid threats of unleashing hell, and its end to Iran's civilization raised global fears and undermined support at home and abroad. And Trump hated this op-ed so much that he sent out a Truth Social post saying the journal is the worst and inaccurate. He said there's nothing premature about this victory. One of the reasons I think people believe that they're declaring victory is because literally they were declaring victory yesterday. And then the president late last night, he says, in the meantime, while they're waiting for the Strait of Hormuz to be opened, our great military is loading up and resting and looking forward actually to its next conquest. Is he just moving on
This is just
to the next thing?
This is totally mad. These are like the rantings of a mentally ill person. And so, the idea that you have soldiers and American troops who are just sort of waiting for him to make a decision on his whim. If you had like an elderly neighbor that was posting those things, you would probably do a welfare check on them and say, like, I hope you don't have access to weapons because you seem very unwell. And this is the commander in chief. And so I really think the silence of one part of Congress on what he's doing, it's catastrophic for the American public. I just can't believe it's happening.
Can you rationalize this?
And it's extremely undesirable to have a president who is an unreliable narrator in a time of war. However, this isn't new. This is how the guy talks. He speaks in superlatives.
We didn't
he
say
says
it was
things,
new.
Yeah,
It's just arguing that it's not good.
But I'm going to cede every criticism of the president in this moment, but I would also contend that if you listen to what the brass is saying in the Pentagon, if you listen to Marco Rubio, even J.D. Vance.
You mean the brass that hasn't been fired? Because the brass that would
Yeah,
tell us
Brad
the opposite would be
Cooper,
the ones that haven't
chairman of
been
the Joint
fired
Chiefs.
by the
All the
Pentagon.
actual
Like, it's all become ridiculous, right? We can no longer, at the end of this, we have lost the narrative.
At first look, what really stands out is the clear gap between announcing success and actually achieving meaningful strategic results. Because in modern conflicts, success is not just about military power, but also about control, stability, and real outcomes. And when an important choke point like the Strait of Hormuz remains disrupted, it shows that the opposing side still holds leverage. And history has proven that even strong military forces can face difficulties when opponents rely on uneven tactics, since control does not come from firepower alone, which is why highlighting military strength does not always lead to true dominance on the ground. While another key point is how changing and inconsistent messaging can weaken a country's position, because when leadership quickly shifts from claiming victory to making fresh threats, it creates confusion both at home and across the world, and allies rely on clear and steady communication to coordinate their actions, especially in sensitive regions. And in previous conflicts, when messaging became unclear, support from partners started to weaken, and once that trust begins to break, it becomes much harder to build united pressure, which is often more effective than acting alone. And when you look at the bigger picture, controlling the narrative becomes just as important as military action, because in today's world, perception drives reality through how markets respond, how allies react, and how opponents plan their next steps. And if the situation appears unstable or without direction, it can encourage rivals while creating doubt among partners. And when you add the economic effects, such as rising energy costs linked to instability in key regions, the stakes become even higher. So without a clear and consistent end plan, this type of conflict risks turning into a long cycle where success is repeatedly claimed, but real stability continues to stay out of reach.